Welcome to the SDG Media Zone. We are here live from the ECOSOC Youth Forum in New York at the United Nations headquarters. I am joined today by three distinguished panelists. I'll start with Mr. Jabri Ibrahim and Mr. Sibusiswe Mazomba. They are both on the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. Welcome.
Okay.
And then we have Ms. Eugenia Boateng.
Yes.
She is the founder and executive director of the African Diaspora Youth Hub. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. My first question is also going to go to Ms. Eugenia. So how have you seen climate impact and reshaping the daily lives of youth on the continent?
Yes, thank you for that question. I'm glad to be here again with my fellow panelists and a moderator as well. So to answer your question, I've seen climate affect the daily lives of Africans. When I first took my trip to Tanzania, I saw that there was a connectivity gap, especially with climate. And in that, we were able to come up with a solution regarding around building solar panels to light up a library and a secondary school in rural Tanzania. And with that, it was very, very interesting to see how they were still resilient, still going through, still seeing how they can use their natural resources and what they have in order to learn, you know, and without light, you're not able to learn properly, you know. So I see that with climate, it not only is just a climate change problem, but it's a systems problem. So it goes from climate, it goes to a lack of education access, and then we can even go into water insecurity, because when I went to their general hospital in rural Tanzania, they were in a short of water, basically, and their governments promised them water, but then they just didn't have it at that time. They had a shortage, and that affected the women's menstrual health as well. So when young girls are not able to properly sanitize themselves because of the low water accessibility and the low water quality, we can see that it affects them, their school performance and everything that they're, you know, they're what they have access to, you know, what they're privileged to have, what they should have, you know what I mean, which is education, proper health. And, you know, so it's just not a climate problem. I guess that's what I'm trying to basically share. That's not a climate problem. It's a systems problem, because it starts from climate, but then it affects health and it affects education as well.
Thank you so much. I'll go over to you, Mr. Sibusiswe.
Yes, you know, just as Eugenia put it, it's not just a climate problem, it is a systems problem. And so climate change, what we're seeing is that it, you know, makes already existing challenges in our societies even more worse. So whether you're talking about education, whether you're talking about health, whether you're talking about, you know, opportunities and access to opportunities for young people, climate change actually, you know, leaves us more worse than we already are. And so what we're seeing is that, you know, you're having more and more extremes, whether it's extreme drought. In South Africa in 2018, there was the day zero, you know, that almost hit communities across Cape Town, which would have left people without water to drink, water to cook, to do anything, right? But also we're having more and more floods. You know, just now at the start of this year in Limpopo, we had really, really bad floods that, you know, we haven't really seen in a long time. And so, you know, there's this increasing uncertainty and unpredictability of where our climate system is headed. And I'd like to hone in particularly on the health. You know, climate change is very much connected to, you know, the growing amount of emissions that, you know, we're seeing, which are causing a lot of problems with air quality. And so that is significantly impacting the health, particularly of young people. In South Africa, we have a high veld in Mpumalanga where, you know, this concentration of coal belts, and this is adding to, you know, the burden, the health burden of young people, whether it's pregnant women as well, or, you know, senior citizens. And so it, you know, exacerbates these already existing health challenges in a lot of these communities, leaving them worse than they were initially. And so reversing a lot of the growth, you know, and the development that, you know, we have made.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Jabri, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just have to agree with my brother and my sister. I think climate impacts and climate shocks can be in very obvious ways. So erratic weather patterns affecting food security. Farmers just don't know how to grow their crops anymore. And as well as in water security, desertifications encroaching across Africa. And those risk hard-fought gains in development across all the SDGs, making states fragile, for example, in increasingly scarce resources that countries and communities are now fighting over. But it can also show up in ways you might not think of. For example, in Kenya, there was a locust invasion that was caused by the climate system and the hydrological cycle being pumped full of carbon for many decades. And that also affected, how farmers would grow, how communities would practice livestock farming, etc. But also increasing storms damage our infrastructure. And Africans, we can't just keep building the same bridge every time a storm comes. We're fiscally strapped. So it's in everyone's best interest to just, even if you don't think science is real or whatever, you know a drought is real and a flood is real. Yeah. So I think that's the type of messaging that will resonate going forward, like flood resistance, because if they hear climate resistance, it's not politically viable anymore.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you so much. It highlights that Africa only contributes that 4% to global emissions, yet we bear the brunt of it all. Yeah. So everything that you've said, I want to reiterate everything. It's very important that we get this right as Africa. We all know that the African Union's theme of the year is water sustainability. And I want to hear from the panelists today, what can Africa do to protect its water resources and do that sustainably? Let me start with you.
I think the theme of water in Africa is one that is particularly important, also for issues related to sanitation. And I think we're seeing actually growing momentum on the continent to invest in water. And this feeds into a broader conversation around, making adaptation bankable, right? We're seeing more and more investments by different entities on the continent to support water-related projects that promote sustainability. And so I think there's a really very clear and positive case studies that we're seeing on the continent. But then, of course, the gaps are still there, and so those gaps still need to be bridged. And as a young climate advocate, I would bring about the solution of young people as a resource, right? Young people are leaders, they're innovators, they're thinkers, they're entrepreneurs. And so they have really special skills and a lot of energy, that they can bring into making sure that we are able to, bank on water projects that not only build resilience in communities, but are also, building jobs, making sure that we improve the quality of life, the quality of sanitation in our communities as well. And so I think recognizing the special role that young people can play in that regard.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it relates to a lot. We can solve a lot in Africa by employing our youth and creating jobs around that. So thank you for that message. I'll go over to you, please, if you could.
Yes, I definitely want to second everything that you said, especially regarding co-developing with youth, building a space of trust in order to really help our climate, help the water security as well. I've seen a lot of projects in regards to water, but then also in regards to gender and water, and that intersection as well. So I've seen a lot of women on the ground, local producers, local agriculture businesses who are already building businesses, and they're not waiting for the governments to give them a job. They're creating the opportunities for their communities and creating the jobs for their community as well in regards to with the resources that are already there. I've seen youth really make the most out of what they have, and I love to see that there's a lot of investments in WASH, there's a lot of investments in water, there's a lot of investments in the growth of Africa, but I still do feel like Africa doesn't really fully see the potential that it has and with its resources yet. So I think that's something that we still need to work on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think for Africa, water, there's some obvious nexuses that water is useful at, for example, sanitation, as you mentioned, food security. But in some ways, things you might not consider. For example, if we want to decarbonize our energy sector, there's two applications. Number one in data centers, which is becoming a really big issue because a lot of people don't have access to clean water. And if they think a lot of water is going to data centers, that can create a bit of tension. And number two, in my career, I've been working on hydrogen. So hydrogen, one of the feedstocks for hydrogen and an input in creating green hydrogen for industrial production is clean water. And a lot of Africans don't have clean water. So when they see water being potentially siphoned out as a common good and going into this high technology end users, it can create a bit of like tension there. That's the first point. And then my last point, water, if you commodify water too much, if you charge people for water, which should be seen as a common good, and you take it away from maybe the people, the community, and indigenous peoples, and you sell it to companies who can then commodify it and sell it back to the people, that we lose a lot of progress doing that.
I agree.
Absolutely. That's a very good point you're making there. So getting into a bit of you, what kind of led you into this climate activist, and what impact have you seen through your work in communities? I'll start this time on the other side, please.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I first started when I was 9, and Kenya is home for the first ever African to win a Nobel Peace Prize, Wanjira Maathai, and or Wangari Maathai, sorry. And she won because she protected one of Africa's biggest indigenous forests, Mau Forest, which still stands to this day. And it wasn't an easy fight. She wasn't lobbying in corridors of power. It was on the streets. And she's a big inspiration to a lot of Kenyans and Africans. So that one kind of was a through line when I was a young person. She was always in the news, in the media. She eventually ran for office as a member of parliament. And seeing that later, in her later years, that same forest came under threat, and it was being showcased in the news. And as a 9-year-old, I was seeing this across the media, and back then you didn't have phones, so the news, we would all sit and like watch it at the same time, that this forest was under threat. And I really thought at 9 that, oh, I have to step up. I have to do more to be part of the solution. And I didn't know exactly how to do that, but I just knew I had to figure that out. So that's kind of how I got my start in climate, and it hasn't stopped to this day. I don't anticipate it stopping anytime soon.
Living the lived experience will always get you there quicker. Yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
definitely. Thank you. I'll move on to you, Eugene.
So I think with me, it started when I went to university here in the States, and I got an opportunity to travel to Tanzania. And it was a really, really nice opportunity because I'm from West Africa, I'm from Ghana, so I'm so used to being in one region of the continent. So going to East Africa was like, wow, it was very eye-opening. I've seen the similarities, then I also saw the differences as well. More similarities than differences, of course. But it really opened my eyes because going to the rural communities, being on the ground with the producers, with the women on the ground, and seeing how like some of them didn't even have basic water. They didn't have the basic necessities that they needed. And then coming back to the States, I felt this ignition of fire in me to see how can diasporians build solutions and stay connected to the continent? Like, what are ways that we can actually continue to be a bridge, you know what I mean? It's an extension, not distant. We're not distant from the continent. Africa is going to be built by its young people, you know what I mean? Not for them, but by them. So that's what really ignited this fire in me to start the African Diaspora Youth Hub, because too often we see youth in the diaspora, they don't know where they're coming from, they don't know what it's like on the continent. they're honestly basing their thoughts and their ideology on the continent based off of mainstream media instead of going there. And me going to Africa has really, really changed my perspective. Like, I really want to make change. I want to co-develop with my fellow youth advocates and activists to see how we can build solutions, you know. And one thing that you said that really stuck out to me was that, you know, we have the resources, they get exported raw, and then we get imported products. Then, like, let's cut out the middleman. Let's benefit from what we already have instead of using Western powers to really to tell us what to do with what we have. You know what I mean? We have the potential, we have the opportunity. You know, I think it's just time that we connect diaspora to Africa. And yeah, I hope that answers your questions. I think I went on a tangent, but yeah, but that's really where it really started, you know, and really staying connected with my roots.
Yeah. Thank you. Please.
Eugenie dropping some nuggets over here.
Yeah, it was amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I think personally, I'm a young boy from Soweto in South Africa. For those who don't know, Soweto is basically a township in Johannesburg, which is the largest city in the country, in Africa as well, actually. And so I could actually say Soweto is probably one of the largest townships on Africa. Don't quote me on that.
Probably in the world.
Probably in the world, you know. So growing up in Soweto, you know, I was exposed to a lot of different, you know, people. We're all just like, you know, one big happy family. If I could simplify it, oversimplified like that. But basically, with all of that camaraderie and, you know, familiarity, there's also a lot of challenges of like crime, unemployment, et cetera, et cetera. And so I actually went to school outside of Soweto. And so I would travel every single day, you know, between the township and the suburbs of Johannesburg. And actually my activism, my entry point rather, was in 2018. And it was not through climate, actually. It was through, you know, at the time in South Africa, there were like a spur of xenophobic attacks that were, you know, happening. And so, you know, seeing this on the news and, you know, as a young person in school at that time, thinking critically about all these issues around me, it was really a thing of like, you know, why are Africans attacking, you know, other Africans? And so I, you know, did a lot of research. I saw that, you know, there was like a whole lot of debate and conversation going on at the time. The Minister of International Relations at the time did a public lecture. And so being the investigator that I am, the Google warrior that I was, I, you know, went online, found the minister and where they were going to be. And I attended that lecture and, you know, asked a lot of questions. I think I was the only young person in the room, the only young person in like school uniform. And it was like around 6 p.m. It was after school. So I took a taxi to go to this public lecture so that I could, you know, speak to the minister and try to understand what we can do about this issue that is not only affecting the current generation, but also future generations, you know. And so I think it's also brings it back to the conversation about, you know, Africans taking charge of their own reality and, you know, us building each other instead of us tearing each other down. And so that was my entry point into the climate discussion. And interesting enough, this was through a think tank, right? And this think tank would like build a lot of capacity among young people to be able to engage in a lot of these different issues. And so from that, you know, it was through the context of like sort of xenophobic attacks, but then it you know, expanded to a lot of other things, you know, engaging in like, how do we build sustainable cities? You know, how do we make sure that we balance the climate? How do we save our water? How do we build jobs for young people today and in the future? And so that was my entry point into all of this. And this think tank then, you know, opened up a lot of other opportunities for me. Shout out to the South African Institute of International Affairs, by the way, because that was the think tank, SAIA, that I initially came in through. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go a bit off script. We're almost at time, but I really want to have one word from each of you for the youth of Africa, taking into consideration the ECOSOC Youth Forum that we're all attending this week. What's one word or one sentence, short sentence, that you really want to leave ECOSOC with and want to tell the rest of African youth? I'll start with you, Eugene.
Okay. I had to take a minute to think. I think what the first thing that comes off the top of my head is to stay energized. You know, I think there's a lot of energy here at ECOSOC. You know, a lot of youth are ready. You know, they're ready. They have the solutions. They're innovators, and they've been innovators. And I don't think it's ever been a lack of ideas, but it's just more about how can we co-develop, co-implement together a full life cycle of implementation from the beginning, and including youth and, you know, diaspora youth as well. So I would say let's just stay energized.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll go over to you, Sibisiwe.
Yes, one key message. I think mine would be that, you know, as young people living on the continent, we have, you know, a lot of challenges ahead, but it's a very decisive battle. And I did mention earlier that young people are thinkers, they're leaders, they're innovators. You know, there's no shortage of innovation among young people. And so I think, you know, they need to keep up definitely the energy, keep up the fight. You know, I think it's really important that as young people, we realize that the climate crisis is actually more than just, you know, balancing our climate in Africa. It's really about justice. It's really about bringing dignity back to, you know, communities where dignity has been stripped. And whether we're talking about water, whether we're talking about critical minerals, all of this is about how do we bring back the power to African communities specifically. And young people have a very special role to play in the continent with their innovation, with their, you know, their entrepreneurship, with their skills in order to start making sure that we move towards that continent where we take back our power.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Please.
Yeah, I think for me, my word that comes up is ambition. I think Africans are very ambitious. I was at the SDG 7 Trusteeship Council plenary, and the 3 African speakers was complete standouts. And maybe that's a biased opinion, but you can go watch the tapes and see how they spoke. They stayed within the 2 minutes. Their remarks were, they meant something. They weren't just reading a script sentence to sentence. And I think for an African to end up in New York City at the UN, they've gone through some things. We had to go through JFK immigration with an African passport. You know?
Let's talk about it.
So I think that makes you take up more space. I'm like, if I ended up here, and I'm gonna say a sentence that just came up to me, but if an American had to go through the same level of visa applications and go through immigration to end up in an African country, I'm not sure how many Americans would meet that threshold.
I agree.
So I think the future is Africans, demographically, and I would encourage every young African to take up space and be ambitious. We are the future.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. I read the other day 70% of Africans are under 25.
Yeah.
We are truly the future, and with that, I just want to leave it. We've heard from amazing panelists. I hope to see many more Africans here in New York. We need more Africans in New York. We need more Africans in Europe.
Obama.
At least in decision making.
Yes.
And as we know, you are all in decision making roles, and I implore you to fully go on and change the world. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Thank you.
us.
Amazing.
Nice.